Ambassador Sarah had always known that her mission to the hegemony carried enormous risks. As Earth's first diplomatic envoy to the aggressive reptilian empire that controlled nearly a quarter of known space, she understood that one wrong move could spell disaster not just for herself, but for the entire human race. Standing in the crystalline chambers of the hegemony's capital world, Prime, Sarah felt the weight of 3 billion human lives pressing down on her shoulders. The ornate hall stretched before her like a cathedral of alien architecture, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt her eyes to look at directly. Hundreds of nobles filled the tiered seating, their scaled hides gleaming under the harsh purple lighting, forked tongues flicking out to taste her fear in the air. They were an ancient species, having conquered worlds when humans were still discovering fire. They stood nearly 8 feet tall on powerful legs, with muscular torsos covered in armored scales that could deflect most conventional weapons. Their faces were elongated and predatory, dominated by rows of sharp teeth and cold, calculating eyes that seemed to weigh the worth of every living thing they encountered. High Sovereign sat upon the obsidian throne, a massive seat carved from a single piece of volcanic glass that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, marked with intricate scarification that denoted his rank and kill count. Battle scars crisscrossed his hide, telling the story of centuries spent crushing rebellion and expanding the hegemony's borders. Sarah had been negotiating for 3 days straight, trying to establish a non-aggression pact between Earth and the hegemony. Humanity had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, and their small fleet of exploration vessels had accidentally crossed into hegemony territory. Rather than attack immediately, they had demanded tribute and submission. Earth's government, desperate to buy time to strengthen their defenses, had sent Sarah to negotiate. The talks had not gone well. "Your species presumes much human," his voice rumbled through the chamber, translated by the neural implant behind Sarah's ear. "You trespass in our domain, then seek to dictate terms as equals." Sarah straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet the High Sovereign's predatory gaze. "Earth seeks only peaceful coexistence, your sovereignty. We offer technological exchange, cultural partnership, and mutual defense agreements." A harsh sound that might have been laughter erupted from the assembled nobles. His head tilted slightly, a gesture Sarah had learned indicated either amusement or imminent violence. "Defense agreements," the High Sovereign's claws scraped against the armrests of his throne. "From a species that numbers only 3 billion souls on a single world, we have conquered empires spanning hundreds of systems. Your entire military consists of, what? A dozen primitive vessels." 17 ships of the line, Sarah corrected, then immediately regretted showing her hand. 17, savored the word. "The hegemony commands 47,000 warships, human, each one capable of reducing your precious Earth to molten slag." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Numbers aren't everything, your sovereignty. History is full of examples where smaller forces triumphed through superior tactics, technology, or simple determination." The chamber fell silent. Sarah realized she had made a critical error. Rose from his throne, his massive frame casting a shadow across the hall. "Are you threatening us, Ambassador?" "No, your sovereignty. I merely point out that underestimating any opponent has historically proven unwise." "Historically," repeated, beginning to pace around his throne. "Tell me, human, what do you know of our history?" Sarah had studied extensively before her mission. The hegemony has existed for over 2,000 years, conquering and absorbing dozens of species across multiple sectors. Your military doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force and the complete subjugation of enemy populations. Indeed, and in all those centuries, do you know how many species have successfully resisted us? Sarah remained silent. "Zero," hissed. "They tried to resist with their crystal ships and energy weapons. We turned there into an asteroid field. They believed their psychic abilities would protect them. We hunted them to extinction across 17 systems. They thought their underground cities would keep them safe. We cracked their planet's crust and watched them burn." The High Sovereign stopped directly in front of Sarah, looming over her. "Each time the condemned species sent ambassadors much like yourself. Each time they spoke of coexistence and mutual benefit. Each time we explained the reality of their situation." Sarah felt sweat beating on her forehead despite the chamber's chill. "What reality is that, your sovereignty?" That there are only two types of sentient beings in this galaxy, the and our slaves. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had hoped, had believed that some compromise could be reached. Earth's intelligence services had suggested they might be willing to accept tribute in exchange for leaving humanity alone. The reports had been wrong. Your sovereignty, Sarah tried one last time. Surely there is some arrangement. Silence, his voice cracked like a whip. You will return to your primitive world with our terms. Earth has 30 standard days to surrender unconditionally. Your population will be relocated to labor worlds throughout the hegemony. Your planet will be strip-mined for resources. Compliance will ensure the survival of perhaps 10% of your species as workers. Resistance will result in total extermination. Sarah's training kicked in. She had been prepared for this possibility, though she had prayed it wouldn't come to pass. Earth's government had given her specific instructions for this scenario. I cannot accept those terms, she said quietly. Cannot, eyes narrowed, or will not. Both, humanity will never willingly submit to slavery. Then you have chosen extinction. Sarah reached slowly into her jacket, and a small device no larger than a coin. Several guards started forward, but waved them back with apparent amusement. What is that, human? A weapon, a recording device? A quantum entanglement transmitter, Sarah replied, her thumb hovering over the activation switch. It will instantly relay our conversation to Earth's government. They need to know that diplomacy has failed. How convenient. Send your message, ambassador. Let them know that their champion has failed them. Sarah pressed the switch. There was no visible sign of activation, no sound or light, but she knew that somewhere in Earth's solar system, an identical device had just received every word of their conversation. Gestured to his guards. The human's mission is complete. Take her to the preparation chambers. Preparation chambers? Sarah asked as massive hands seized her arms. For the execution ceremony, of course. Did you think we would simply let you leave? Horror washed over Sarah as the full implications hit her. You never intended to let me return to Earth. Naturally, the do not waste ships and fuel on pointless gestures. Your death will serve as a much more effective message than your words ever could. Sarah struggled against the guard's grip, but it was like fighting iron statues. This is a violation of diplomatic protocol. I carry full ambassadorial immunity. Immunity granted by whom? Your pathetic government has no authority here. You are in hegemony space, subject to hegemony law. The guards began dragging her toward a side exit. Sarah's mind raced, searching for any option, any hope of escape. The preparation chambers likely meant torture before execution, designed to break her will and extract information about Earth's defenses. Wait, she called out desperately. If you're going to kill me anyway, at least tell me why. Why not simply conquer Earth without this charade? Paused, seeming to consider the question. An interesting inquiry. Very well, human. You deserve to understand the magnitude of your species' error. He gestured for the guards to halt, but not release her. The hegemony has learned that swift conquest, while satisfying, often leaves resistance cells that can cause problems for centuries. Far better to break a species' spirit first. When your people see their ambassador's execution broadcast across your primitive networks, when they understand the futility of resistance, many will welcome our arrival as an end to uncertainty. Sarah felt sick. You're going to broadcast my death. In exquisite detail. Every scream, every plea for mercy, every moment of your degradation will be transmitted to Earth. Your leaders will have no choice but to surrender or watch their people lose all hope. And if they surrender, then we will kill them more quickly. The result remains the same. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of her family back on Earth, of the billions of people counting on her mission. She had failed them all. You know, she said quietly, I studied your species extensively before coming here. I read about your conquests, your tactics, your culture. And I think you're going to regret this. His laugh was like grinding stone. Regret? What could your insignificant race possibly do to us? Sarah met his eyes with surprising calm. I guess you'll find out. The guards resumed dragging her away. As they reached the chamber's exit, Sarah heard address his assembled nobles. Begin preparations for the invasion fleet. In 30 days, we will add another trophy to our collection. The preparation chambers were exactly as horrible as Sarah had imagined. They had turned torture into an art form, with devices designed to inflict maximum pain while keeping the victim conscious and aware. They began with psychological torment, forcing her to watch recordings of previous executions while describing in detail what awaited her. But Sarah had been trained for this too. Earth's military had learned from the experiences of captured pilots and special forces operatives. They had developed techniques for mental resistance, for compartmentalizing pain and fear. Sarah used every one of them. Hours passed. The grew frustrated with her refusal to break, her unwillingness to plead or provide intelligence about Earth's defenses. They escalated to physical torture, but still Sarah endured. Finally, as the artificial day cycle reached its end, himself entered the chamber. Remarkable, he admitted, studying Sarah's battered but unbroken form. Most species begin begging for death within the first hour. Sarah spat blood from a cut lip. Most species haven't spent their entire history fighting each other. Meaning, humans have been perfecting warfare. For thousands of years, we've fought with sticks, with swords, with nuclear weapons. We've survived ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts. We don't give up easily. Nodded slowly. Perhaps this is why your execution will prove so effective. If we can break one as strong as you, your people will understand their situation. You still don't get it, Sarah whispered. Enlighten me. You're not trying to break me to demoralize Earth. You're trying to break me because you're afraid. The High Sovereign's scales bristled with anger. Afraid of what? Of the message I'm really sending. Before could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Red lights flashed in the corridors outside, and Sarah could hear the thunder of running feet as guards rushed past. A communication device crackled to life on Spelt. The voice speaking was urgent, panicked. High Sovereign, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout human space. Multiple FTL signatures approaching our border systems. Eyes widened. How many ships? Unknown, sir. The energy readings are. They're unlike anything in our databases. Sarah began to laugh, a sound that sent chills through even the hardened torturers. What did you do? Demanded. I told you, Sarah gasped between laughs. You studied our history wrong. You learned about our conquests, our expansion, our willingness to submit when faced with superior force. Yes, but you didn't study what we do when someone threatens our children. The alarms grew louder. More reports flooded in of energy signatures throughout human space, of ships moving faster than anything they had seen, of technologies that didn't match any known specifications. Sarah's laughter finally subsided. When she spoke again, her voice was perfectly calm. The quantum transmitter didn't just send our conversation to Earth's government. It sent a coded message, embedded in the data stream. A message that triggered protocols we've had in place since before first contact. What protocols? Total war protocols. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology we've ever developed is now being mobilized. But more than that. Sarah met's increasingly worried gaze. You see, when you told me about the other species you've conquered, you made a mistake. You assumed humanity was like them. You thought we'd react like the. And you won't. Oh, we will. We'll fight to the last man, woman, and child before we let you enslave us. But that's not the mistake you made. Then what? Sarah's smile was cold as space itself. The mistake was thinking we'd fight alone. High Sovereign stared at the human ambassador with growing unease. The alarms throughout the palace complex had been wailing for nearly 10 minutes now, and the reports flooding in from across hegemony space painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Explain yourself, human, he snarled, his claws extending unconsciously. Sarah sat in the torture chair, her injuries forgotten in the face of what was unfolding across the galaxy. You want to know what my real message was? It was simple. The children are in danger. Before could respond, General burst into the chamber, his usually pristine scales dusty with ash from some distant battle. His breathing was labored, and Sarah noticed with satisfaction that one of his arms hung useless at his side. High Sovereign, gasped, the border systems, they're under attack. By human forces. Not just humans, the general's voice cracked with something Sarah had never heard from before, fear. The crystal ships, they're operational again, dozens of them appearing out of nowhere. His jaw dropped. Impossible. We destroyed the 2 centuries ago. The species is extinct. Apparently not, replied grimly. Our forces at the system report massive crystalline vessels emerging from what appeared to be empty space. They're using some kind of dimensional folding technology we've never encountered. Sarah's smile grew wider. They weren't just warriors, you know. They were explorers, scientists. When your forces attacked there, they didn't all die in the bombardment. Whirled on her, what are you talking about? Some of them escaped, scattered across dimensions we can't even perceive. They've been waiting, watching, learning, waiting for someone else to stand up to the hegemony. Another messenger rushed into the chamber, this one bearing the communications insignia of the Fleet Command. High Sovereign, priority transmission from Admiral in the Epsilon sector. Put it through. A holographic projection materialized in the center of the room, showing an admiral whose scales were burned and blackened. Behind him, Sarah could see the bridge of a warship in chaos, with sparks flying from damaged consoles and crew members rushing to contain fires. My lord, Admiral began, his voice tight with controlled panic. We've lost contact with the 4th and 7th battle groups. Last transmission showed them engaging unknown vessels using what appeared to be psychic warfare techniques. Eyes narrowed, described these unknown vessels. Organic ships, sir, living vessels that seem to respond to thought rather than conventional controls. They screamed when we destroyed them, and the psychic backlash affected our crew's minds. Sarah's laughter filled the chamber again. You thought you'd hunted them all down, didn't you? But psychic species don't die the way physical ones do. Consciousness finds a way. You're lying, hissed. We have confirmation of every death. We tracked them across 17 systems. You tracked their bodies, Sarah corrected. But minds can survive in places you never thought to look, in quantum foam, in subspace, in the spaces between thoughts. They learn to exist as pure consciousness, waiting for the right moment to take physical form again. The holographic admiral continued his report. Sir, the psychic attacks aren't just affecting our crew's minds. They're somehow interfacing with our computer systems, turning our own weapons against us. Several ships have reported their targeting systems locking onto friendly vessels. Fall back to the secondary defensive line, ordered. Concentrate all forces in the Gamma Quadrant. Sir, the Admiral hesitated. There might be a problem with that strategy. What kind of problem? The tunneling networks, sir. They're active again. The color drained from scales. That's impossible. We cracked their planet's crust. We watched their cities burn. Admiral nodded grimly. Yes, sir, but apparently they had deeper tunnels than we realized. Much deeper. Our geological surveys are detecting movement in the planetary cores of worlds we conquered decades ago. They have been building, sir, expanding their networks across entire star systems. Sarah felt a warm satisfaction spreading through her chest despite the pain from her injuries. Did you really think species that survived by living underground wouldn't have escaped tunnels? They didn't just dig cities. They connected worlds through subspace. When you cracked their surface, you never touched their real civilization. How, demanded, how could they coordinate across such distances? Quantum entanglement networks built into their tunnel systems. They've been in contact this whole time, sharing information, preparing. And when my message went out. Sarah paused for dramatic effect. When my message went out, it wasn't just to Earth. It went to every quantum entanglement relay the refugees had managed to establish. Every hidden survivor, every scattered remnant, every thought and consciousness that had escaped your genocides. The chamber fell silent except for the continuing alarms. Sarah could see the pieces falling into place in his mind, the terrible understanding of what humanity had really been doing for the past 3 years. First contact, he whispered. First contact, Sarah confirmed. But not with the hegemony. Oh, that was a convenient cover story. No, our first contact was with a dimensional scout who materialized in our solar system 3 years ago. Half dead, ship falling apart, but alive. She shifted in her restraints, ignoring the pain. Do you know what the first thing he told us was? Beware the children killers. That's what he called you. Because that's what you are. You don't just conquer species. You deliberately target the young, the helpless, because breaking the children breaks the parents' will to fight. His claws scraped against the floor. It is an effective strategy. It was, until you encountered a species whose primary evolutionary advantage is cooperation. See, humans are pack animals. We form bonds not just with our own kind, but with anything we perceive as needing protection. And when that scout showed us the records of what you'd done, Sarah's voice hardened. When we saw the children's bones scattered across the ruins of Prime, when we heard the psychic screams of younglings being torn from their parents' minds, when we witnessed the footage of nurseries collapsing into molten rock, that's when you stopped being just a threat to humanity. What did you become? You became a threat to our adopted children. A new alarm joined the cacophony, this one in a different pitch that made every in the room freeze with instinctive dread. "What is that sound?" Sarah asked. General answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Core world proximity alert. Something large has entered the inner system." The holographic display suddenly shifted to show a new transmission source. This time, the image was from a monitoring station on the outer edge of the system itself. The officer speaking was young, probably assigned to the posting because nothing ever happened in the hegemony's most secure system. Command were reading massive displacement signatures just beyond the gas giant. 17. No, 23 distinct FTL signatures. Ships are materializing out of hyperspace. Human vessels, demanded. "Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match any known technology. Wait." The young officer's voice rose in alarm. "They're scanning us. I'm reading active targeting systems locking onto our station. Evasive maneuvers. Contact the defense grid." "Sir, the signals aren't coming from the ships." "What?" "The targeting signals are coming from inside the planet, from the mining tunnels we use to extract lithium. Something's down there and it's coordinating with the ships." Sarah began laughing again, the sound echoing through the chamber like a death knell. She gasped between peals of laughter. "How many worlds did you strip mine with their technology? How many planetary cores did you hollow out using their tunneling expertise? Did you really think they wouldn't leave little presents behind?" The transmission continued. "Command, we're detecting massive structural instabilities throughout the planet's crust. It's like the entire mining network is. Oh gods, they're not mining tunnels. They're demolition charges." This roar of rage shook the chamber. "Impossible. Our security sweeps would have detected any explosives." "Not if they were part of the mining equipment itself," Sarah said cheerfully. "Engineering is incredibly sophisticated. They can make a support beam that's also a fusion bomb, or a ore processing plant that's actually a massive gravity well generator. You've been sitting on a planetary-scale demolition system for decades, and you never knew it." The young officer's voice cracked with terror. "Sir, the ships are moving, 17 human vessels, but they're not like anything in our databases. The design is completely alien." "Send the fleet specifications to my station," ordered. "Already transmitting, sir, but sir, there's something else. We're detecting additional ships materializing. Different configurations, different energy signatures. It's like every species we've ever fought is here." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Exactly like that, because that's exactly what's happening." She turned to face directly. "You want to know what humanity's been doing for the past 3 years? We've been building an alliance, not with living species, but with ghosts, with survivors, with the scattered remnants of every civilization you tried to destroy. They taught us dimensional folding technology, allowing us to hide entire fleets in spaces you can't detect. They showed us how consciousness can interface with quantum computing systems, creating hybrid organic digital intelligence networks. They shared their expertise in subterranean engineering and planetary-scale construction projects." Sarah's smile was fierce with pride. "And in return, we offered them something none of them had anymore." "What?" "Hope, the hope that the children killers could be stopped." The transmission from the monitoring station suddenly cut to static. When it resumed, the young officer was gone, replaced by a figure that made take an involuntary step backward. The being on the screen was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its body appeared to be made of living crystal that refracted light into rainbow patterns. When it spoke, its voice resonated with harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously. The said, its words somehow managing to convey infinite sadness and infinite rage at the same time. "We have returned." Behind the crystal being, Sarah could see the monitoring station's control room. Every there was on their knees, their scales turned gray with terror, but they were unharmed. We do not make war on the helpless, the continued. It is not our way, but you who feast on the tears of children, you will answer for your crimes. Found his voice. You are extinct, I watched your burn. A can burn a people. A people endures, especially when they find new family among the stars. The crystal being gestured, and the view shifted to show the space around Prime. Sarah gasped at what she saw. Hundreds of ships hung in the void, representing designs from dozens of different species. Crystal ships that bent light around them like living prisms. Organic vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Massive tunnel-boring ships that looked like metallic worms the size of small moons. And scattered throughout the fleet, sleek human vessels that seemed to incorporate technology from all the refugee species. The Alliance of the Scattered, they announced. Children of races you believed extinct, united under the banner of Earth, united in purpose. What purpose? Whispered. Sarah answered for the crystal being. Justice, for every world you burned, for every child you murdered, for every species you tried to erase from existence. We came to end the age of the hegemony, the continued. We came to ensure that never again would the innocent suffer at your claws. Alarms throughout the palace complex reached a new crescendo. Reports flooded in from across hegemony space of simultaneous attacks on dozens of worlds. The carefully coordinated offensive was unlike anything the military had ever faced. Sarah looked at, seeing her own satisfaction reflected in his growing terror. You know the funny thing about humans, she said conversationally. We're really, really good at learning from other people's mistakes, and every species you conquered made the same mistake. What mistake? They fought you alone. The Palace of High Sovereign had become a fortress under siege. Emergency barriers had been activated throughout the complex, turning the ornate halls into military bunkers lined with defensive weaponry. Warriors rushed through corridors that just hours before had hosted diplomatic ceremonies, their scales gleaming with combat armor and their faces set in expressions of grim determination. But Sarah could see the fear in their movements, the way their eyes darted toward the windows that showed the battle raging in the skies above Prime. The Alliance fleet had not begun their attack immediately. Instead, they had done something far more psychologically devastating. They had waited. For 3 hours, the combined forces of humanity and the refugee species had simply hung in space around the hegemony's capital world, their weapons powered but not yet firing. During those 3 hours, every on the planet had been forced to look up at the instruments of their potential destruction and contemplate their mortality. Status report, commanded as General entered the chamber where Sarah remained restrained. Not good, my lord. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders over the din of battle. The orbital defense grid has been compromised. Somehow, the tunneling systems beneath our major cities have been connected to the defense platforms. They are controlling our own weapons. How many platforms have we lost? 70%. The remaining stations are firing on each other under remote control. We've had to shut down the entire grid to prevent further friendly fire incidents. Sarah nodded approvingly. Engineering. They don't just dig tunnels, you know. They build entire transportation networks through subspace. Every mining operation you ever conducted using their technology has been laying the groundwork for this moment. Struck her across the face with the back of his clawed hand, opening a fresh cut on her cheek. Silence, human. You can't silence mathematics, Sarah replied, spitting blood. And the math is pretty simple. You have approximately 47,000 warships scattered across your empire. The Alliance has detailed intelligence on the location of every single one, courtesy of the species you thought you'd exterminated. She gestured toward the nearest window with her chin, where the battle could be seen raging in the distance. They're not trying to match your numbers. They're using your own tactics against you. Overwhelming force applied at critical points, coordinated across multiple dimensions of space and time. Another messenger burst into the chamber, this one bearing the insignia of the intelligence services. High Sovereign, we're receiving reports from across the Empire. It's not just a military attack. Explain. Every major industrial world is experiencing simultaneous uprisings. Slave populations that we thought were completely are somehow coordinating resistance activities. Our production capabilities are dropping by the hour. Sarah smiled through the blood on her lips. Did you really think the survivors of conquered species would just forget about their enslaved populations? The dimensional technology doesn't just hide ships. It can create communication networks that exist outside normal spacetime. Every slave, every prisoner, every conquered population has been in contact with the Alliance for months. They've been planning, organizing, preparing. And now, the lights in the chamber flickered as a massive explosion somewhere in the distance sent shock waves through the palace's foundations. Now they're all acting at once. General activated his personal communicator. "Command, this is General. What was that explosion?" "Sir, the main munitions depot has been destroyed. Internal explosion, cause unknown." "Sabotage." "Negative, sir. Security recordings show the explosion originated from the storage chambers themselves. It's like the weapons turned themselves into bombs." Sarah's laughter filled the chamber. Psychic technology, consciousness machine interfaces, every smart weapon, every AI-guided missile, every computer-controlled defense system in your entire empire has been, let's call it, influenced by psychic entities you thought were dead. "Impossible," snarled. "Our weapons don't have consciousness interfaces." "They do now. They don't need physical access to machinery. Consciousness exists in quantum states that can interface with any sufficiently complex system. Your weapons are committing suicide rather than harm innocent people." The High Sovereign's communicator crackled to life, bringing a transmission from space. This time, the voice belonged to a human. "Vessels, this is Admiral of the Earth Defense Force. We are transmitting on all frequencies. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded." Keyed his own communicator. "Human ships, this is High Sovereign of the Hegemony. You are vastly outnumbered. Withdraw from our space immediately or face annihilation." "Actually," Admiral's voice carried a note of dry humor, "I think you'll find that we have you outnumbered. 17 ships against an empire. Your mathematics are as primitive as your technology. 17 ships that you can see, but you're thinking 3, that taught us to think in 12 dimensions simultaneously." On cue, space around Prime began to shimmer and distort. What had appeared to be empty void suddenly erupted with the appearance of hundreds of additional vessels materializing from dimensional folds that the sensors couldn't detect. "Phase 1 complete," Admiral announced calmly. "All stealth units are now visible. Current Alliance fleet strength, approximately 2,000 vessels." Stared out the window in horror as the space around his filled with enemy ships. But worse than their numbers was their coordination. The fleet moved like a single organism, each vessel perfectly positioned to support the others in a three-dimensional dance of tactical precision. "How?" he whispered. Sarah answered. "Group consciousness technology combined with quantum communication networks and dimensional awareness. Every ship in that fleet is essentially an extension of a single distributed intelligence. It's impossible for organic minds to process that much information simultaneously." "You're right, organic minds can't handle it, but human-AI hybrid consciousness can. We've been working on machine-human interface technology for decades. The refugee species provided the missing pieces." Admiral's voice continued the explanation. "What you're facing isn't just an alliance of species. It's an alliance of consciousness types. Organic, digital, psychic, and quantum minds working in perfect harmony." A new voice joined the transmission, this one carrying the crystalline harmonics of communication. "High Sovereign, I am Seer Aura of the Crystal Reaches. We meet at last." "You're supposed to be dead," replied. "Death is a transition, not an ending. We have learned much during our exile in the dimensional spaces between realities. We have learned patience. We have learned to wait, and we have learned to plan." "What do you want?" "Justice for our children, restoration for our people, an end to the age of fear you have created." Another voice joined the communication, this one carrying the eerie harmonics of psychic speech. "High Sovereign, I am Mind Singer of the thought that endures. Our young ones cry out across the dimensional barriers, seeking the parents you stole from them." "And I am Tunnel Master of the Deep Roads," added a third alien voice. "Our cities still burn in the planetary cores where you thought you had extinguished us, but fire forges strength, and we have grown strong in the darkness." Sarah watched face as the full scope of what was happening became clear to him. 3 years, she said quietly. 3 years of careful planning, coordinated across species and dimensional barriers. 3 years of building an alliance not of nations, but of the dispossessed. "What are your terms?" asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral answered, "Unconditional surrender of all hegemony forces, immediate liberation of all slave populations, full reparations to be paid to survivor populations, and war crimes tribunals for all individuals responsible for genocidal activities. And if we refuse, then you will discover what happens when a species that specializes in overkill decides to wage total war." Looked around the chamber, seeing his advisors and guards for what they truly were, the last desperate remnants of a dying empire. The reports flooding in painted a picture of systematic collapse across hundreds of star systems. "You cannot possibly coordinate an attack of this magnitude," he said, grasping for any remaining hope. "We're not coordinating it," Sarah replied. "We're participating in it. There's a difference." "Explain." "Coordination implies central command, hierarchy, linear thinking. What you're facing is something else entirely. It's emergence. Spontaneous organization arising from shared purpose across multiple species and consciousness types." The chamber shook again, as another massive explosion rocked the palace complex. "Sir," General shouted over the noise, "we're receiving surrender signals from fleet elements across the Empire. Entire battle groups are laying down arms." "Impossible. Warriors don't surrender." "They do when faced with certain defeat, my lord. The fleet commanders are reporting that their vessels are being systematically disabled by weapons they cannot see or understand. Ships are losing power, weapons are malfunctioning, and crews are experiencing psychological effects." Sarah nodded. "Psychic warfare. They're not attacking your crew's minds directly, they're simply showing them the truth." "What truth?" "That everything you've told them about supremacy is a lie. That you're not the apex predators of the galaxy. That there are things in this universe far more dangerous than you could ever be." "Such as?" Sarah's smile was cold as the void between stars. "A human mother whose children are threatened." The communication array crackled again, this time carrying a new voice. Female, calm, speaking with the authority of absolute command. "High Sovereign, this is President of the United Earth Government. I want to speak with Ambassador." Hesitated, then activated the visual communication system. A holographic display materialized, showing a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to look directly into the High Sovereign's soul. "Madam President," Sarah said formally, despite her restraints and injuries. "Ambassador, are you injured?" "Nothing that won't heal, ma'am." "Good report." "Diplomatic mission unsuccessful. The hegemony has rejected all terms for peaceful coexistence and has declared their intention to enslave or exterminate humanity." "Understood. Have they harmed you?" Sarah glanced at her captors. "They've attempted to extract information through physical and psychological torture. Standard hegemony protocols for captured diplomats, according to their own statements." President's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. "I see. High Sovereign, you have committed an act of war against the United Earth Government by torturing our duly appointed ambassador." "Your ambassador trespassed in sovereign hegemony space," replied, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "After being invited to conduct diplomatic negotiations. Ambassador carries full diplomatic immunity under interstellar law." "There is no interstellar law that applies to the hegemony." "There is now," President gestured, and the view shifted to show her location. She was standing in what appeared to be a vast chamber filled with representatives of dozens of different species. Sarah recognized some of them from her briefings, survivors of conquests who had thought themselves alone in the universe. "The Galactic Council of Free Peoples," President announced, "has been established to provide governance and legal framework for all sapient species who reject the principle of conquest and enslavement." "Your council has no authority over the hegemony," protested. "Actually, we do. As of 1 hour ago, the council voted unanimously to formally charge the hegemony with crimes against sapience. The penalty for such crimes is the complete dissolution of your government and the liberation of all populations under your control." Sarah felt a surge of pride as she watched the pieces of humanity's true plan finally come together. This hadn't just been about building a military alliance. They had created an entirely new political order, one that explicitly rejected the model of dominance through force. "You cannot dissolve a sovereign government," snarled. "We're not dissolving it," President replied calmly. "We're simply choosing not to recognize its legitimacy, and without legitimacy, what you have isn't a government. It's just an armed gang that got too big for its own good. We have 47,000 warships. You had 47,000 warships. Current estimates put your operational fleet strength at less than 10,000 vessels. The rest have either surrendered, been captured, or had their crews refuse to follow orders." General activated his communicator with shaking hands. "Fleet Command, what is our current operational status?" The response came back in the voice of a broken warrior. "General, we've lost contact with over 3/4 of our forces. Those still reporting are requesting permission to surrender. The crews, they're seeing things, sir. Visions of the worlds we've destroyed, the children we've killed. The psychic attacks are showing them what we've really done." Sarah nodded with grim satisfaction. Truth is the most powerful weapon in the universe, and they are very, very good at making people see the truth about themselves. The throne room of the hegemony had never seen anything like the tribunal that was now taking place within its crystalline walls. Where once only nobles had stood to witness the high sovereign's pronouncements, now representatives of dozens of species filled the chamber. Crystal beings refracted light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Consciousness entities manifested as shimmering fields of psychic energy. Tunnel masters emerged from dimensional portals that opened directly into the chamber. And at the center of it all stood the humans. Admiral had arrived on the palace station 3 hours after the hegemony's surrender, accompanied by a strike force that moved with the precision of a military unit and the calm authority of diplomats. Sarah had been freed from her restraints and treated for her injuries by a healer whose touch could mend both body and mind. Now she stood beside Admiral as they faced the assembled leadership of the hegemony. Remained on his obsidian throne, but the seat of ultimate power now looked more like a defendant's chair in a courtroom. "High Sovereign of the hegemony," Admiral began, her voice carrying the formal weight of legal proceedings. "You stand accused before the Galactic Council of Free Peoples of crimes against sapience, including but not limited to genocide, enslavement, torture of diplomatic personnel, and the systematic destruction of civilian populations." "I do not recognize the authority of this council," replied, but his voice lacked its former commanding presence. Seer Aura of the Crystal Reaches stepped forward, her crystalline form shifting through the light spectrum as she spoke. "Recognition is not required for truth to exist. You are guilty of these crimes whether you acknowledge the court or not." "You have no proof," General interjected from his position beside the throne. Mindsinger materialized as a swirling vortex of psychic energy that gradually took on a humanoid shape. When the entity spoke, its voice seemed to come from inside the minds of everyone present rather than through the air. "Proof," this mental voice carried bitter amusement. "We carry the memories of every consciousness you have destroyed, every thought you have silenced, every dream you have ended. We are proof incarnate." Tunnel Master emerged from the floor itself, the stone and metal parting like water to allow passage. "The deep roads remember all things. Every world you have, every tunnel you have collapsed, every underground city you have flooded with molten rock. The planetary cores themselves bear witness to your crimes." Sarah stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over despite the emotional weight of the moment. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said calmly. "Recorded communications, survivor testimony, physical evidence from destroyed worlds, and direct confession in your own words. You admitted to genocide. You described your methods in detail. You boasted of your kills." "War is not a crime," protested. "This was not war," Admiral replied. "War implies conflict between military forces. What you conducted was systematic extermination of civilian populations, including deliberate targeting of non-combatants and children." President's holographic image materialized in the center of the chamber, her presence commanding immediate attention from all assembled representatives. "The evidence phase of this tribunal is concluded," she announced. "We now move to the sentencing phase. Representatives of the affected species will present their recommendations." Seer Aura was the first to speak. "The people have conferred across the dimensional barriers. Our recommendation is exile to the spaces between realities, where you may contemplate the weight of your actions across the span of eternal solitude." Mindsinger's psychic voice resonated with cold fury. The collective consciousness demands that you experience the death of every mind you have destroyed. Each consciousness you silenced should be reflected in your own experience of cessation. Tunnel Master's recommendation was delivered with the slow, grinding weight of geological time. The proposed that you be buried in the deep places of dead worlds, entombed in the ruins of the cities you destroyed, where the weight of stone and time will teach you the permanence of consequence. Other species representatives added their voices to the chorus of condemnation. Each recommendation was creative in its cruelty, shaped by the particular way their people had suffered under hegemony rule. Finally, President called for the human recommendation. Admiral looked at Sarah, who nodded and stepped forward to address the tribunal. The United Earth government recognizes the justice inherent in all previous recommendations, Sarah began. However, we propose an alternative sentence. The chamber fell silent. Life imprisonment, with the opportunity for rehabilitation through service to the communities you have harmed. Shocked murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. Several species ambassadors began speaking at once, their voices rising in protest. Seer Ara's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light. You would allow these butchers to live. Sarah raised her hand for silence. We would allow them the chance to atone through action rather than simply suffer through punishment. Explain your reasoning, President requested. Killing them accomplishes nothing except satisfying our desire for revenge, but making them work to repair the damage they've caused. Sarah gestured toward the leadership. They have knowledge of their empire's infrastructure, their military capabilities, their industrial processes, information that will be vital in the liberation and reconstruction efforts. Mindsinger's psychic voice carried skepticism. You would trust those who have shown such capacity for cruelty. We would supervise them, Admiral interjected. Psychic monitoring by the collective to ensure compliance, dimensional imprisonment by technology to prevent escape, deep tunnel containment by engineering to eliminate physical threats. Sarah continued the explanation. Each member of the hegemony leadership would be assigned to assist in the reconstruction of a world they personally destroyed. They would work under constant supervision to help rebuild what they tore down. And if they refuse, Tunnel Master asked, then we implement the exile, consciousness death, or entombment recommendations as previously outlined. President nodded slowly. The human proposal has merit. It serves both justice and practical necessity. The hegemony's victims deserve not just revenge, but restoration. Finally found his voice. You expect us to become slaves to the species we conquered. No, Sarah replied firmly. We expect you to become servants to the communities you destroyed. There's a difference. What difference? A slave works for the benefit of their master. A servant works for the benefit of those they serve. Slaves are property. Servants retain their dignity through the value of their service. Admiral stepped forward. The choice is yours, High Sovereign. Accept the human proposal and spend your remaining years working to repair the damage you've caused, or refuse and face the alternative sentences. Looked around the chamber at the faces of the species he had tried to exterminate. In the crystalline faces of he saw the reflected light of worlds he had darkened. In the psychic emanations of he felt the weight of minds he had silenced. In the stone-solid presence of he confronted the permanence of the destruction he had wreaked. If I were to accept this proposal, he said slowly, what guarantee would I have of fair treatment? The same guarantee you gave to your victims, Sarah replied without mercy. None. The High Sovereign flinched as if struck. However, she continued, the Galactic Council of Free Peoples operates under different principles than the hegemony. Our laws protect even the rights of war criminals to basic dignity and fair treatment. Why, General asked, why offer mercy to those who showed none? Sarah looked directly at him. Because mercy is what separates civilization from barbarism. Because showing compassion to those who deserve at least proves that we are better than what we oppose. She gestured toward the assembled representatives. Because every species in this chamber has experienced the worst that sapient beings can do to each other. And we've all made the same choice, to be better, to build something greater than the sum of our individual traumas. Mindsinger's psychic presence grew more focused. The human speaks truth. Vengeance is a cycle that consumes all who participate. Justice, justice can heal. Seer Aura's crystalline form shifted to deeper, more contemplative hues. The collective has conferred. We accept the human proposal, with the modification that the rehabilitation service continue until the convicted parties have demonstrated genuine understanding of the harm they caused. Tunnel Master's voice rumbled like shifting continental plates. They agree. Let them rebuild what they destroyed. Let them learn the value of creation through the labor of their own hands. Other species representatives added their agreement, each with their own modifications and requirements, but all accepting the fundamental human proposal. President's holographic image nodded with satisfaction. The sentence is decided. Members of the hegemony leadership will serve supervised rehabilitation sentences, contributing their knowledge and labor to the reconstruction of damaged worlds and the liberation of enslaved populations. She turned to face directly. You have 1 hour to decide whether you accept this sentence or prefer the alternative recommendations. Choose wisely. This is the only mercy you will be offered. As the tribunal began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing alone with Admiral in a quiet corner of the chamber. "Do you think it will work?" the Admiral asked. "The rehabilitation approach." Sarah considered the question carefully. For some of them, yes, others will simply go through the motions, but even that serves our purposes. How so? Because the most important audience for this tribunal isn't the leadership. It's the rest of the galaxy. Every species, every civilization that might consider following the hegemony model is watching how we handle victory. Admiral nodded slowly, and they're seeing that we chose justice over revenge. More than that, they're seeing that strength and mercy aren't incompatible, that it's possible to defeat evil without becoming evil yourself. Sarah looked around the chamber, where representatives of formerly extinct species worked alongside humans to plan the liberation of enslaved worlds and the reconstruction of destroyed civilizations. The real victory isn't that we defeated the hegemony. The real victory is that we did it without becoming them. In the distance, alarms had finally stopped wailing. For the first time in centuries, Prime was at peace. And across the galaxy, in star systems that had known only tyranny and fear, newly liberated populations looked up at unfamiliar stars and dared to hope for a better future. The age of the hegemony was over. The age of the Galactic Council had begun. 3 years had passed since the fall of the hegemony, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the fear-dominated realm it had once been. Where once a single species had ruled through terror and overwhelming force, now hundreds of worlds worked together in voluntary cooperation through the Galactic Council of Free Peoples. Ambassador Sarah stood on the observation deck of the space station that had been built in the neutral zone between human space and what was once the heart of the hegemony. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see vessels from dozens of species moving through the shipping lanes, carrying goods and passengers on journeys that would have been impossible under rule. A crystal ship glided past, its hull refracting the light of the local star into spectacular rainbow patterns. Nearby, a convoy of transport vessels emerged from a dimensional tunnel, their cargo holds filled with rare minerals extracted from the deep places of liberated worlds. A squadron of human fighters flew escort for a consciousness ship, their hybrid crews coordinating through psychic links that would have been inconceivable before the Alliance. "Quite a view," said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Admiral approaching, her uniform bearing new insignia that marked her as a marshal of the Galactic Council Defense Forces. The past 3 years had been kind to her, the stress lines around her eyes replaced by the satisfied expression of someone who had lived to see her greatest work come to fruition. "It never gets old," Sarah replied. "Every time I look out there and see all those different ships working together, I remember what we accomplished." "What we accomplished," Admiral corrected. "This was never just a human victory." Sarah nodded, gesturing toward a section of the station visible through the window where workers were installing new life support systems under the supervision of a mixed-species engineering team. "How are the rehabilitation programs progressing?" "Better than anyone expected, honestly. About 40% of the former hegemony leadership have shown genuine signs of rehabilitation. They're contributing meaningful work to the reconstruction efforts." "And the other 60%? Admiral's expression darkened slightly. still going through the motions, but even their forced compliance has value. They possess detailed knowledge of hegemony infrastructure that we need for the liberation efforts. Sarah watched as himself emerged from an airlock, now wearing the simple work coveralls of a construction supervisor rather than the elaborate robes of a sovereign ruler. The former high sovereign looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his crimes and the reality of his reduced circumstances. What world is he assigned to this month? Prime, Admiral replied. Or what's left of it. The dimensional reconstruction project requires someone with intimate knowledge of how the planet's ecosystem functioned before the bombardment. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's ironic. The requested him specifically. They believe that being forced to rebuild what he destroyed is the most effective form of rehabilitation. They watched as joined his work crew, his movements those of someone who had learned to find purpose in labor rather than conquest. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was genuine. Any word from the Outer Rim Liberation fleets? Sarah asked. Excellent news, actually. The last of the slave colonies in the Gamma sector have been freed. The tunneling ships made it possible to evacuate populations that the hegemony had thought were permanently trapped in deep-core mining facilities. Admiral activated a holographic display that showed the current status of liberation efforts across former hegemony space. Green indicators marked successfully liberated worlds, yellow showed worlds in transition, and red indicated the handful of systems where isolated holdouts were still attempting to maintain control. 97% liberation rate, she announced with satisfaction. The remaining holdouts are cut off from support and resources. They'll surrender or starve within the year. Sarah studied the display, noting the complex logistical network that had been required to coordinate the liberation of thousands of worlds simultaneously. The consciousness-linking technology has been invaluable, she observed, being able to share tactical information instantaneously across hundreds of light-years of space. Game changer, Admiral agreed. Though I have to admit, having psychic voices in my head during staff meetings takes some getting used to. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display shifted to show President calling from the Earth government complex on Luna. Admiral, Ambassador, the President began without preamble. I wanted to personally inform you that the Galactic Council has received a formal petition for membership from the hegemony successor states. Sarah blinked in surprise. All of them. All 17 provisional governments that have formed in former hegemony space. They're requesting admission to the Council under the Rehabilitation Accords. This was unprecedented. The Rehabilitation Accords had been established to govern the reconstruction process, but they had never contemplated entire governments seeking to join the organization that had defeated them. What are their terms? Admiral asked. Full acceptance of Council law and oversight, voluntary submission to psychic monitoring of their leadership, continued participation in reconstruction efforts for damaged worlds, and, President paused, formal apology ceremonies to be conducted on every world they formerly oppressed. Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride at seeing former enemies seek redemption, caution about the potential for deception, and hope that the galaxy might truly be moving toward lasting peace. What's the Council's response? She asked. The matter will be put to a vote next week, but preliminary discussions suggest strong support, especially from the refugee species representatives. After the transmission ended, Sarah and Admiral walked through the station's corridors, passing through sections where representatives of dozens of species worked side by side on various projects. In one laboratory, human scientists collaborated with crystal shapers to develop new forms of dimensional technology. In another workshop, consciousness entities worked with human AI specialists to create hybrid intelligence systems that could coordinate activities across galactic distances. They paused at a viewing port that looked out on one of the most remarkable sites in the galaxy, the construction site of New Prime. The original had been completely destroyed by hegemony bombardment, reduced to scattered asteroids and cosmic dust. But crystal technology, combined with human engineering and deep space construction techniques, was slowly rebuilding the planet from its component atoms. Massive crystal growth ships moved through the asteroid field, using dimensional manipulation to reassemble matter at the molecular level. What had taken billions of years of natural planetary formation was being accomplished in decades through the combined efforts of multiple species working in perfect harmony. "They say it will be even more beautiful than the original," Admiral observed. "Different," Sarah replied. "Not better or worse, just different. A planet born from cooperation rather than cosmic accident." A young human technician approached them, carrying a data pad and wearing the insignia of the Council's division. "Ambassador, I have the monthly report on the cultural integration programs." Sarah accepted the data pad and scrolled through the information. The numbers were remarkable. Former slave populations weren't just being liberated, they were being integrated into the broader galactic community. Children who had known only the inside of mining facilities were attending schools on garden worlds. Adults who had spent their lives in forced labor were learning new trades and discovering talents they never knew they possessed. "The success rate on educational integration is 94%, the technician reported proudly. "Former slaves are not only adapting to freedom, they're contributing innovations to the reconstruction efforts." "Any particular examples?" Admiral asked. "Well, a group of former tunnel slaves developed a new method of dimensional excavation that's tripled the speed of planetary reconstruction projects. And a consciousness entity who had been used as a communication relay for hegemony forces has designed a psychic healing technique that's helping other trauma survivors recover their mental stability." Sarah smiled. "Freedom breeds innovation." "Yes, ma'am. There's also been an interesting development in the rehabilitation programs. Some of the former military officers have been requesting transfer to reconstruction duties rather than supervisory positions." "Why?" "According to their psychological evaluations, they find direct physical labor more psychologically satisfying than leadership roles. The therapists believe it represents genuine internalization of the value of productive work over domination." After the technician departed, Sarah and Admiral continued their tour of the station. They visited the Memorial Hall, where holographic displays honored the memory of every species that had suffered under hegemony rule. The exhibits were not just lists of the dead, but celebrations of the cultures that had been preserved and the knowledge that had been saved. In the center of the memorial stood a living crystal sculpture created by artisans. The crystal grew slowly over time, adding new formations as more lost worlds were restored and more extinct species returned to life through genetic reconstruction programs. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had chosen differently?" Admiral asked as they stood before the memorial. "If we had gone with the other species' recommendations for dealing with the hegemony leadership?" Sarah considered the question. "We'd have won the war but lost the peace. Revenge feels satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't build anything lasting." "And you think what we built is lasting?" "Look around you. Former enemies working together, species that were thought extinct contributing to galactic civilization, children of former slaves and former slavers attending the same schools." Sarah gestured toward the window, where the lights of hundreds of ships created a constellation of cooperation across the void. "This isn't just lasting. This is evolution. The galaxy is becoming something it's never been before." Admiral nodded slowly. "A community of equals instead of a hierarchy of conquest." "Exactly. And that's humanity's real contribution to galactic civilization. Not our technology, not our military tactics, but our stubborn insistence that everyone deserves a chance at redemption." As if summoned by their conversation, Seer Aura materialized nearby, her crystalline form shimmering into existence through dimensional folding technology. "Ambassador, Admiral," they greeted them with harmonic tones that spoke of deep satisfaction. "I bring news from the reconstruction efforts." "Good news, I hope?" Sarah asked. "The most hopeful news possible. New Prime will be ready for initial colonization within 2 years. The first residents will be volunteers from all member species of the Galactic Council." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. All species, including reformed who have demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. The new world will be a living symbol of what cooperation can accomplish. Admiral wiped away her own tears. "After everything they did to your people, you're willing to let them help build your new." Seer Aura's crystalline form pulsed with gentle light. "The greatest revenge against those who would destroy is to create something so beautiful that their destructive impulses are transformed into constructive ones. New Prime will be the redemption not just of our species, but of the ideal that all consciousness has value. As they talked, Sarah became aware of other presences gathering around them. Mindsinger manifested as a swirl of psychic energy, their mental voice carrying harmonics of profound gratitude. Tunnel Master emerged from the deck plating itself, their ancient wisdom radiating through their stone-like presence. The deep roads sing with new traffic, reported. Trade routes that were closed for centuries are reopening. Worlds that knew only extraction are learning abundance. Psychic voice added layers of meaning to the words. The collective consciousness of the galaxy grows stronger each day. Fear diminishes while hope multiplies across the networks of thought and dream. Sarah looked at these beings who had been written off as extinct, who had suffered unimaginable losses, who had every reason to choose hatred over hope. Yet here they stood, working to build something better. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Seer Aura asked. "For proving that we were right, that mercy was worth the risk, that building is better than destroying." Mindsinger's response came as a wave of warm gratitude that washed over everyone present. "You showed us that endings can become beginnings, that loss can become transformation, that even the deepest wounds can heal if treated with patience and care." Tunnel Master's voice carried the weight of geological time. "The foundations you have laid will support civilizations yet unborn. The deep roads will carry their songs long after our current forms have returned to the elements." As the representatives of the refugee species departed to continue their work, Sarah and Admiral remained at the memorial, watching the lights of the fleet move through space in patterns that spoke of purpose and cooperation. "One more question," Admiral said eventually. "What's that?" "Do you think they'll really vote to admit the successor states to the Council?" Sarah smiled. "Yes, because that's what we do. We give people chances to be better than they were. Even people who don't deserve them. Especially people who don't deserve them. That's what makes us human." Outside the window, a new ship appeared in the traffic pattern. It was of design, but its hull bore the insignia of the Galactic Council rather than the hegemony. Former enemies, now allies, carrying supplies to liberated worlds where former slaves worked alongside former masters to build something neither could have imagined alone. The galaxy was healing, and humanity had kept its promise, to show that strength and mercy were not only compatible, but that together they could create wonders that force alone never could.